Thanks, man. Yeah, I was just thinking if we did the beer into bread and then the bread back into beer, or then the beer back into bread, and we call it the circle of loaf. That'd be cool. So anyway, I'll try and take his job, yeah? So I'm Rob Wilson. I'm Chief Toaster at Toast Ale. And it's awesome. Today we've touched upon food waste a few times and some interesting projects that are tackling it. I guess we're on a mission to prove that the alternative to food waste is frickin' delicious and pint-sized, as we say in the UK. So we brew our beer using surplus bread that would otherwise go to waste. There's a slice of surplus bread in every can. And we also pour 100% of our profits into environmental charities that are fighting food waste. And we think we are the best thing since you know what. And so this whole thing started in the UK around 3 and a bit years ago now. We actually brought it to the US about 18 months ago on the 4th of July, which we thought was hilarious as a bunch of Brits being like, we're back. But it started in the US. It started in the US about 3 years ago, and it was a friend of mine, Tristram Stewart. He's a food waste campaigner and environmentalist, and he and I were having a chat. He'd just come back from a trip to Brussels where he had tried a beer that was brewed with surplus bread, and he was like, "Hey man, do you want to start up a beer company? Should we get wasted on waste?" And I was just like, "Yeah, man, let's definitely do that." Because he was talking to me about some of the issues of food waste. I'd say I was fairly aware of it, but I certainly wasn't a passionate environmental campaigner trying to prevent food waste. But since Tristram started talking about it, and he's been on the case for about 15 years or so, he's done a TED talk on it, it's been seen millions of times, written a book on it, it's really started to hit the global headlines. And suddenly people are talking about it. It was awesome this morning with Project Drawdown really making us aware that the food industry has by far the biggest impact on climate change. People always think of the energy industry or the transportation industry or just deforestation on their own, but obviously all of those things are ultimately often caused by the food industry. And 1/3 of the food that we produce in the world goes to waste. I'm probably preaching to the converted here. You're probably aware of some of the very alarming statistics, the fact that 1 billion tons of food goes to waste every single year. The fact that if food waste were a country on its own, it would be the 3rd biggest greenhouse gas emitter. Some really alarming statistics. And so when we broke it down and realized we could do something pretty fun with it, we thought, yeah, let's definitely do it. Because there's other projects that you're probably quite familiar with. You're probably familiar with wonky and ugly fruits and vegetables. That's become quite a mainstream thing now, where people will turn your sort of not so attractive oranges into an orange juice. That's become a concept that people are familiar with. But we realized that the worst food waste offender of them all is the humble loaf of bread. So in the US, we're actually worse in the UK, which as a Brit, we normally like to be quite smug that we're more environmental than the US. In this instance, we're worse. 44% of the bread that we bake in the UK goes to waste. It's just over 30% here. In the UK, we're freaking addicted to sandwiches, and so that's where a lot of our bread surplus comes from, where the end slice in a loaf of bread, the crust, the heel, is surplus to requirements and never ends up on our pre-packed sandwiches. But when we realized that the worst food waste in the world was bread, and then we realized that beer is the 3rd most consumed drink in the world after water and tea. So in America here, coffee you'd think of, but globally, water, tea, then beer. And actually, beer was brewed with bread for thousands of years. This is how beer was routinely made. The first ever beer recipe was brewed with surplus bread. And before it was, I guess, popular, fashionable, thankfully, to start talking about the circular economy, for thousands of years, people had it sussed. Local villages just figured it out, that if there was a bakery that had surplus, the brewery could use their bread. And so what we do with toast, we replace 1/3 of the malted barley in the brewing process. So it's exactly the same process. I'd love to say it was all like, super scientific and we had some kind of magic formula to it. It's not. It's really straightforward. And so we replace 1/3 of the malted barley with surplus bread that would otherwise go to waste, and it brews really delicious beer. So this is a shameless plug for our products, quick advertorial. But we are doing some sampling, so please come along and try some of our beer. We've got a lager, an IPA, an APA. So a big thing about Toast is trying to appeal to really mainstream consumers. And so coming up with 3 SKUs, 3 beers that are going to appeal to anyone and everyone. We're not trying to make some really funky, quirky beer that isn't going to actually appeal to the masses. We ultimately started the business on 4 founding principles that underpin everything that we do, everything that we are. So number 1, it's just really freaking good beer. That's like the number 1 principle. If someone wants a good beer, they want a good beer. They don't necessarily want some preachy, virtuous product. They just want it to serve its purpose. And we've had the thumbs up from people like Jamie Oliver, a UK celebrity chef. Dan Barber's been a big supporter of ours. Anthony Bourdain was a big supporter of ours as well. So we've had great support from celebrity chefs that say it absolutely stacks up when it comes to quality and taste. And we think it looks good, presents well as well. That's really important when you're trying to bring consumers on board. The second thing about who we are and what we're doing and our sort of founding principle is that we're trying to eliminate commercial bread waste. So we're not happy to just rest on our laurels and brew our beer, Toast. We've open sourced our recipe. And so that's been downloaded about 50,000 times so far. Got a huge number of homebrewers. Anyone homebrew here? Any homebrewers? We need more. You can teach everyone else. We need more homebrewers. Go to our website and you can download the recipe, have some fun with some pots and pans. It's pretty straightforward. And so we're working with the sandwich industry in the UK. We're also working with bakeries here. In New York, we work with a bakery called Bread Alone, really great organic bakery, but a huge amount of surplus that they're producing. And we're trying to work with bakeries all around the world. So we set up collaborations with breweries in other countries. And then the third thing is about communicating food waste, like I say, but not in a preachy, righteous way. We're trying to make this as fun, as accessible as it possibly can be. And yeah, what better way to get a good conversation started about environmentalism and food waste than lubricating it with a beer. So then the final principle behind our business, which is perhaps the sort of funkiest of all, to an audience like this, it won't be when I'm speaking to like a super sort of corporate business audience. At this point, they just get totally lost. So we give all of our profits to charity. So 100%, we are a for-profit business. We want to make as much money as we possibly can, but we want to give that money away. So we pay ourselves, pay the team, run it as a sustainable business, but instead of just getting richer and richer, we share those profits with really awesome campaigning organizations, far more kind of activism, trying to change government policy, retail behavior, consumer behavior, change some of the laws that we need to be changed so that food waste can be and should be a thing of the past. And then, and then underpinning it all is our kind of brand mission statement. So we believe that if you want to change the world, you've basically got to throw a better party than the people destroying the planet. And what better way than beer to get a good party started? So this kind of underpins a lot of who we are, what we do. We have a lot of parties, celebrate a lot. We think the planet is a wonderful, beautiful, vibrant planet. It's an amazing place. We should celebrate this planet, and we should celebrate what it is to change the world and to save this planet, rather than being virtuous and righteous. It's kind of like, it's awesome, it's joyous, and we want to bring people together. A lot of our values around companionship and bringing people together over a beer. So we've had quite a lot of media coverage, which has been great. We've had videos that have gone viral and been seen by millions of people. And we think that beer has been quite an interesting avenue to connect with people that might not have otherwise thought about the issues of food waste. We've had tens of millions, probably hundreds of millions actually, of people read about or see our work on YouTube or read about it in the New York Times. We've been in the Times of India. We've been on like Japanese and Korean TV. It's been wild how much media attention this has gathered, which is, super exciting, because that, again, is all about building this culture of change that we think is necessary, as well as helping sell some beer, which is also pretty handy. And then one of the final things that we're doing is trying to really build this industry-wide movement. So we're launching this kind of certification. We're calling it Toast X, where we're partnering with breweries all around the world. So seeing how we can, so we're already brewing in the US, the UK, South Africa, Brazil, Iceland, and Ireland. And we ultimately want to be brewing, which is quite a lot for seeing as we've only been going 3 years. We're pretty ambitious. Food waste is a really urgent issue. It's not the sort of business that we can, I don't know, build up over the next couple of decades and see how we go. This is an urgent issue. But what we want to try and do is build this business through collaboration and partnership. So working with hundreds of breweries around the world where we can connect local bakeries, local breweries. It's kind of like the Tinder of brewing. So connecting bakeries and breweries and food waste organizations all over the world to brew their own delicious beers that can tackle food waste and support local environmental organizations. So that is me. That's a wrap. Everyone join us later in raising a toast to ending food waste one beer at a time. Cheers.